Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Charleston Leadership Interviews. My name is Meg White, and I am a senior consultant at Delta Think and a director of the Charleston Conference. Today, we are delighted to be talking with Roy Kaufman, who is Managing Director, Business Development and Government Relations at Copyright Clearance Center, and he is scheduled to be a speaker at the upcoming 2024 Charleston Conference. Roy, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing some of your time. This is a great opportunity to get to know you a bit better for the Charleston community. So we're grateful that you're able to join us today.
Thank you, Meg. It's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the next conference. It's only a couple weeks away.
Couple weeks away. So there we go. So I'd like to start. This is really a great chance, as I said, in addition to your comments at the upcoming conference, a chance to get for our audience to get to know you a bit better. So I'd like to start just with your professional history. You're an attorney, but you have a keen interest and focus in copyright law. So can you talk to us a little bit about how all that came about?
Sure. So I graduated from college, and I was very interested in art. And I also wanted to go to law school. So I got very interested in the notion of art and the law and the interaction between fine arts. I was very into surrealism, so appropriation and collage and montage. And that was sort of what was triggering in my head. I ended up going to Columbia Law School, which had a really great, one of the better art law programs, and joined a journal. So I've been in journals some way or another as an editor of a journal in law school, and really started to learn a little bit about copyright, which I had some vague concept of before I got to law school. But of course, given what I was interested in, I started getting deeper and deeper into copyright. And I became interested in that and international copyright and the Berne Convention and all these different concepts. From there, I said, okay, well, I'm going to do arts or entertainment law, and went to a small law firm that did a lot of music law work, music litigation. And sounds more exciting than it actually was because I was a first year associate in the library. But the clients were interesting, Meatloaf and Cyndi Lauper and Madonna, but not that I met any of them.
And you got to be in the library, which was a key word in there too.
Yeah,
So
keyword, young associates back then, we spent a lot of time in the library. Your LexisNexis, this is pre-internet, so you had a LexisNexis terminal and a Westlaw terminal, and they were separate. And you sat there at those terminals. You didn't have it at your desktop. You didn't have any of that. So that's
and you're still a pretty young guy, so we're not talking about that long ago. So
well, I
let's say
appreciate it. I think I'm older than I look, or maybe people are just polite to me. Anyway, so I then decided I was going to go into arts and entertainment. I didn't love law firm life, and I wanted to go in-house. Pretty much always knew I wanted to work at a company or someplace where I could be more directly involved in the action. And I interviewed for a lot of jobs in motion picture and music and professional sports, and ended up getting a job at one of the, I refer to as least sexy companies I could find, which was John Wiley and Sons. This was, again, before the internet. And so it was dirty ink on dead trees business, as we used to call it. And I had some experience, though, doing what was then known as computer law, because I had been involved in a big lawsuit involving the Unix operating system and things like that. So Wiley hired me in part because I had some legal experience relating to digital and digital publishing. And then I was there a couple of years and the internet happened. So that's when the job got really interesting, because Wiley was very early on with journals online and was involved. I had the privilege of helping to launch Crossref and all these industry initiatives, and it became really fun. I mean, I feel like had I joined publishing in the 80s, it would have been a lot less interesting because so much of what was happening had been happening for so long. But, today everything changes so rapidly, and I love that.
well, and we certainly do. Just timing. We live in interesting times. The transformation has been as you're talking about pre-internet, post-internet, and still we're running headlong down the path. So
Yeah, well, now we're in the, we'll be talking about pre-AI and post-AI very shortly if we
very
haven't already.
shortly, exactly right. So you mentioned your time at Wiley, more traditional publisher, certainly. Let's just call it that. But tell us a little bit more about Copyright Clearance Center, some background on the organization, and maybe some of your current priorities there.
Absolutely. So I joined CCC as an employee about 13 years ago. I was actually on their board of directors before I joined as a staff member. So I kind of date my time with CCC almost 18 years if I do the board plus the employee piece of this. So CCC was founded in the late 70s. We opened business January 1, 1978, which is the operative date of the 1976 Copyright Act. And the concept behind CCC was a familiar concept in other countries for text publishing and a familiar concept in the United States with respect to music, the idea of having a place where you could do collective licensing. At the time, there was a disruptive technology. It was called the photocopy machine. And so the question was, what happens when you put something on the photocopy machine? Is it infringement or is it fair use? And the answer is, it's just a photocopy machine. Are you doing an infringement? Are you making a fair use? And one of the ironies is, we have the same conversation over and over again, even with AI. Is AI fair use? Is it not fair use? Is what I'm going to talk about. The answer is, it's not a use. The use might be a fair use. The use might be an infringing use. And AI is like a photocopy machine. It's a tool that makes copies, or a tool that, involves the making of copies to be used. It has another purpose other than the making of copies, of course, unlike a photocopy machine. But back to CCC. So CCC begins life in 1978 because of the photocopy machine, and then originally it's just photocopy, transactional photocopy, so course packs for the academic community, and making copies for your marketing department if you're in a corporation. Then digital happens, things get exciting. We move from just transactional licensing to collective licensing, while always having transactional licensing as well. So, some people want to transact copyright only for a specific item when they need it, and other people say, just give me a bill once a year and leave me alone. That's collective licensing. It's give me a bill once a year, leave me alone. Transactional is I'll pay as I go for what I need. We start doing that. We move into digital, generally internal. Most of what we license historically, and there are exceptions because everything with CCC has exceptions. It's an extraordinarily complex organization. But most of what we do is internal reuse rights at educational institutions or corporations. So you're a large university system and you buy a lot of journals and books and magazines and newspapers, and sometimes you have a license that gives you the right to make course packs with it, but sometimes you don't have a license because you just bought it in print. And we create sort of license normalization. So you can have the same license that goes across all of your content for whichever content is in our license. So everything is voluntary and non-exclusive. We only have what's in our license. There are other countries where the approach is different. So that's what we do. We learn how to do things. We begin, we're doing collective licenses. We are starting to hear from our customers, can you get us some content to go with our licenses? It's great to get the rights, but get us content. So we do different programs. For example, in the academic community, we have something called Get It Now, which is sort of an interlibrary loan type product where instead of ordering a document and waiting 3 weeks to get it, you get it instantly. Get It Now, that's the name. And that's
Very clever.
yes, it's descriptive. And that's sort of individual article purchases, usually intermediated through a library, faster, cheaper than the existing ILL services. We do document delivery largely to corporations. We help corporations buy reprints. And then, just forwarding, we start getting more involved in technology. So today we have well over 600 employees, more than half of whom are doing data integrity, programming, software engineers, all these kinds of things. Everything from licensing is just metadata, so managing our own metadata, to operating PID systems. So we have we bought a few years ago the Ringgold persistent identifier system. And so we now own and maintain that. That's a dozen plus people doing data integrity day in, day out. That's something that's used not so much by the libraries because the buyers are the publishers who are supplying the libraries, but that has, basically your library identifiers, your library hierarchies, your consortia, all of that kind of data. That's just one example. We also are very involved in open access, where we help manage, on behalf of about 40 publishers, all of their open access transactions. So if they do a transition agreement or read and publish or pure APC journals, we manage all of that globally. So we're doing all of those transactions with all the tax rules worldwide. I could go on and on. We're involved in so many things, but for the Charleston community, I think open access, copyright licensing, and persistent identifiers are probably the big things that I tend to talk about when I get to Charleston.
And those are the things bringing in my head, that were really resonant when you were talking. But the thing that surprised me, I don't know if it surprises other folks on this call, 600 employees. So the diversity of what the organization does just outside of those things that are really relevant for this community was eye-opening for me. So thanks for that and for sharing that background. Drilling in, CCC recently introduced a collective licensing solution that is designed to allow organizations to be compliant with copyright when using data and information providers' content within their own internal AI systems, specifically training those systems. Now, then tell me if I'm getting this all correct too. So if you could talk a little bit about that solution and exactly, how it's intended to work, both for the licensors and the copyright holders.
Absolutely.
How does this fit into this new developing AI landscape?
Yeah. So to sort of bring it back, remember what I was talking about where we started with photocopying and then we moved to email and intranet and other internal reuses. At CCC, AI we view that as just an evolution as to how people interact with content. So AI is built into your workflow tools already. For a lot of our researchers, particularly research-intensive pharma companies and the like, often the machine interacts with the content before the human does. This is a trend that we've seen since before anyone ever heard of OpenAI, right? This has been a trend that we've noticed in the last 12 years. And so to us, what we decided to do, we issued what we think is the first collective license anywhere in the world that covers AI uses. It's for internal reuse and it's in the corporate space. So what that means is if you're a corporation and you have our annual copyright license, which allows you, again, your sort of standardized set of internal reuses of content. Previously, it would be photocopy and email and the like. Now that includes AI use cases. We had a lot of compliance people and librarians and the people who we work with at corporations who are saying, I'm in a big organization. I've got 50,000 employees. I don't know who's doing AI or what they're doing with AI, but I'm worried from a copyright matter that we are compliant. We don't want to get sued, but more importantly, we want to do the right thing. Can you help us? So we spent about a year meeting with users and rights holders. And it's really important with collective licensing that you're really meeting with the users because they're the ones who you're trying to satisfy. Mm-hmm. And we rolled out I think it was in July, this license. So it's very much a right added to our license. It's not a freestanding license that you buy. You already have our annual copyright license. and now you get the rights for AI. And again, everything's voluntary and non-exclusive. So we're signing, someone might correct me. It feels like we're getting about one publisher a day. So we have hundreds of publishers who said, okay, if an end user has lawfully acquired my content, they are allowed to make AI uses of that content, and it's within the four walls. So you can use a third-party software, but you can't be feeding back the LLM. One of the challenges with a lot of these open AI and some of the open LLMs is when you put in a prompt or you put in information, it goes back to train the AI. And there have been examples where people have put proprietary information or unpublished information, and it ends up in the LLM. So that's not allowed. But but you can do it for your own purposes. You can't make a commercial AI product. That would be a separate license, and we can actually help people get those rights to make a third-party product, but that's not what's within this license scope. But that's what it is. It's really designed for that evolution of how our, in this case, corporate users are using their content for internal purposes. There will be more coming from us, I can assure you, and I'm already working on more.
I'm not going to bet against that for sure, for sure. But so you're talking about that. So how is that really analogous to data mining within an organization? You mentioned pharma. That's kind of where my brain went.
So there's a lot of debate right now about the overlap between text and data mining and AI. I'll give you an example of inconsistently viewing this. So the European Commission, when they came out with their AI Act, they actually said that text and data mining is how you train AI. There's a politician in Europe who said that. Then a few weeks ago, a paper came out by some academics which said, actually, text and data mining is not how you train AI, because text and data mining is about looking for the facts, and AI is about capturing the expression, at least in generative AI. And that same politician said, oh, this is a great paper, I agree with it. So you have one leading politician in the EU both saying text and data mining is how you train AI and is not how you train AI. So there's this open question. And I also think part of the problem is we think of AI, or for that matter, text and data mining, as a thing. It isn't a thing. It's a tool that has many use cases and many different approaches. And I'm sure there's some ways that AI are trained that involve text and data mining. And then when you're talking about generative AI and the output, that's got nothing to do with text and data mining. The text and data mining has already been done in the training. So you can debate whether or not it's text and data mining in the training. And then there are aspects of AI that are beyond text and data mining, even if text and data mining is what's used in the training. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, I just, you mentioned this tension between what the politician said and what the academic said, and we're just going to leave that there.
Yeah, it gets very metaphysical. I mean, because the academics were saying the reason it's not text and data mining is, as I said, text and data mining is about extracting facts. And the AI companies say, oh, well, we're not making copies. Of course they're making copies. In fact, what they are extracting when they tokenize and vectorize content is actually, that's what they want, is the expression. They want the way the author connected those words, because that's how they're training their language models.
Right.
So, now if it isn't text and data mining, the academics' position in Europe is the text and data mining copyright exception does not apply, and therefore everything done by these AI firms, including the training, is infringing. That's the argument that they are making there.
No, and it sort of becomes, in my head, I just triggered this, where is the intellectual property reside? Because that would, to me, would be the thing that needs to be protected. You know, a data set is a data set is a data set oftentimes.
And I do, one of these things, I will sometimes refer to it as data, but I do try to actually refer to it as content, because as an author, I don't want my book called data. I want my book called a book. If I'm a musician, I want my music called music, not data. And that's part of the game, in the government relations side, that the companies that don't want to pay for these rights, oh, it's all data, it's all, I mean, literally I was at a meeting where they said, well, it's all ones and zeros and therefore it's not a copy. I said, wait a minute, every digital product, every streaming audio, every streaming video is zeros and ones. So that doesn't exactly fly.
Right. I mean, and that's what makes content unique. I mean, that's what makes it, that's the IP, that's the art.
Yes.
Is that so? And we're gonna talk a little bit about you as not wanting your intellectual property to be seen as data. We're going to talk a little bit about that because you are an author as well as being an attorney. So we'll come on to that. But looping back to the conference, you're participating in the long arm of the law session at Charleston, which is always a highlight of the conference. It's must attend event. So you'll be talking about, not surprisingly, the impact of AI on licensing and copyright. In addition to what we've already talked about, can you give us a little sneak peek? You're going to be joined by Nancy Copans from JSTOR. So any sneak peek about what we might expect during that session?
Well, for better and worse, I'm going to bring everything kind of back to the basic concepts of copyright law because I find there are minimalists and maximalists, and there are people who will come out and say, text and data mining is fair use. And there are people who will say, text and data mining is not fair use. And if you understand fair use, you can't make those statements and be accurate. Text and data mining might be fair use, and it might not be fair use. And training AI might be fair use, and it might not be fair use. And so when is it fair use and when is it not fair use? And, what is the Google case, which is, often cited by the people who say everything's fair use? They miscite the Google case. And I'm like, well, there's that same court a couple years later came out with a case that sort of said the opposite in a different context, which doesn't mean the Google case was wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it was wrong. Just saying you have to look at all the facts. So it's really, I do feel you can't have a discussion about copyright and AI without at least sort of level setting and also distinguishing what an advocate says from what the reality in the ground is. Because we've seen in the library community, sometimes advocates take a position on copyright which isn't supported. A lot of people follow that, and I'll call the Internet Archives case as the primary example, where there are academics, but really library advocates, or a type of library advocate, I should say, certainly not all library advocates took this position, who said, "Oh, this is fair use. Let's push this envelope." And the case wasn't close. If you look at the district court and the appellate court, it wasn't like, oh, this is a hard case to decide. You'll see them. If it's a hard case, they'll say, this is not a hard case. And people followed and really took on liability because they followed advocacy papers as opposed to getting into the nuance of really what was going on, if that makes sense. I just think we have to be careful. So I do plan to sort of bring it back to some basic concepts of, what's fair use, what's an infringement, and what's the court actually going to look at in making a decision.
Well, and I love that because I think for the audience, especially the librarians in the audience, they really just want to understand the issues to inform how they behave, right? How they would act. So I think that's going to be tremendously valuable. And as you said, AI is just another, I like the metaphor, but maybe I'm just thinking about it, maybe a little oversimplification, but it's just another photocopier, right? If you think of it in that way, if you understand those underlying principles, it gives you a framework from which to sort of understand.
My longer version of that talking point begins with piano player roles. I'm sure, I can't confirm this because I'm too lazy. I'm sure in the late 19th century, Big Piano was arguing we can't possibly allow copyright to prevent us from having piano player roles, and copyright isn't fit for purpose. I do know there were debates about whether copyright covered piano player roles, just as there are debates about talkies and radio and community access television, which is cable and satellite transmission and audio. And we have the same discussions. I mean, one of the things is everyone always says this time is different, and maybe there are times when it's different, but usually it isn't. And usually we just need to let the concepts of fairness and equity and exclusive rights for creators, tempered by, reasonable readings of fair use and copyright exceptions, to just work their way through the system and not constantly say, oh, we need new legislation, because by the time legislation always solves yesterday's problems tomorrow. It's terrible at solving a business crisis because it takes so long, which is, I think, licensing solves business needs. That's why you start with the user. What do you need? What do you think you'll need in a year? What do you think you'll need in 3 years? Okay, let's start building this.
Well, and you mentioned solving yesterday's problems tomorrow. I mean, with technology, there's just the speed of innovation and technology available. I mean, it's making that problem, exacerbating that problem.
Yeah, it's massive.
Compounding that problem, right?
Yeah, I work with some LLMs, trying to help them license rights in for third-party applications, and where I'm working with major rights holders who want to license, and they can change every 3 weeks. I mean, they change staff every 3 weeks. They change their focus every 3 weeks. It's really hard you got to catch them while they're running. You sort of have to catch them at that moment, and hand them a baton before it gets dropped. Or they
and
trip.
they're on to the next, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So fascinating. And thanks for sharing that. I'm looking forward to that session, as I'm sure many folks are as well. So we're doing pretty well on time, maybe time for one more question here. And you brought this up. In addition to being an attorney, you're also an author and an editor. So in the era of AI, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and or threats to your rights as a content creator, copyright holder?
Yeah, so it's
What do
funny.
you think is going to be better? What do you think is going to be worse?
I think for authorship, AI is going to provide this incredible value when used responsibly by authors. And I think of this a lot from the STM context. If you're a researcher and you've done innovative, interesting research, and you can use an AI authoring tool to sort of help you put the words around what you've done, it can speed up the authorship process. If you're not a native English speaker, it can make your language cleaner and all of that. That's the positive. The negative is using it responsibly. I believe plenty of people aren't going to use it responsibly, and they'll just generate fake papers by AI. Those papers then get sent to journal publishers. Journal publishers, even if they can quickly desk reject them, that costs money. So what's going to happen is, with this flow of AI and paper mills, and now AI-enabled paper mills, the costs on the publisher are going to go up. And this is one of the things that I know libraries, I've been to enough library conferences, publishers make too much, they charge too much, APCs cost too much, all of those arguments. And I'm not getting into that. You have to think about the cost side of the ledger when you're thinking about what the publishers charge. And the cost side of the ledger in the last few years has gone up for good reasons. There's more output, there's more research, and bad reasons. There's more paper mills, there's more perverse incentives in the system, and there's going to be more AI-generated junk, and hopefully more AI-enhanced good stuff. So that's where it is. As an author, my books are kind of old, and I'm probably not going to write another book for a little while. And every time there's a mass infringement event, I go to look up my book and it's never there. And, I always feel like, okay, maybe I don't want to be infringed. But Matt Groening of The Simpsons once said, copyright infringement is the sincerest form of flattery. And I just think, God, my books are so bad, no one even wants to steal them.
I don't think that's true, Roy. Come on now. Come on.
They're too niche.
They're not true at all.
They're niche. But anyway, so I'm making a joke there. Obviously, as an author, I want people to request reuse of my book before they use it. That's fundamental, and it's less important to me as an author than for me as understanding what it took to be an author, how many the years I put in
Hmm.
to each book, and just feeling if someone takes it without my consent and reuses it, I think like, so what was my effort for? And again, I don't write for the money. No one should write for the money. I mean, some people do it well for money, but most people do not. I don't write for the money, but you also want to have like the recognition and an acknowledgement that you provided something of value. And again, that's sort of one of the things like, oh, it's all data and I'm just going to scrape and I'm going to use pirated books. I'm like, someone created that. Like,
Hmm.
forget about the law, forget about, what you can get away with. What's the right thing to do? Like, if you're at Thanksgiving with your parents, say, oh yeah, I took all this stuff without the consent of the author so I could make $1 billion. I don't think it sounds great. I don't think it does.
It doesn't sound great, and in point in fact, it's not great. It's
No, thank
stealing.
you.
It's stealing. I mean, that's just that. So I don't know if I'm allowed to put my editorial thumb on the scale, but I just did. So this has been so interesting. And again, I'm looking so forward to your session at Charleston.
You know
It's
what?
going
I
to be
could
Friday
ask me
morning.
about the book I wrote, my most recent book.
Yes, please.
I prepped for
I
that
go. The last,
conveniently.
here's my list. What was the last book you read not related to your work? Go.
Awesome. Tom Lake,
Ann Patchett.
right? Right?
Beautiful book.
I actually
Beautiful book.
I saw her speak at a place called Symphony Space in Manhattan when the book came out as part of the book tour, and I hadn't read the book. And I've read some Ann Patchett, but
Mhm,
not all Ann Patchett,
mhm.
right? And of course, everyone there has read it all. And embarrassing, I've never actually seen Our Town. So right? So then I had to, before reading Tom Lake, I had to quickly go online and say, okay, what happens in Our Town? Who are the characters? But I loved the book, and yeah, what I loved about it is it's the first thing I've read, and I'm sure there's other sort of literature of the pandemic, right? You can
Mhm,
imagine in 30 years, there's someone teaching a course, which I would take in a heartbeat, literature of the pandemic.
mhm.
And in it, she tells this story, and it's a great story because Ann Patchett wrote it, and she can tell a great story. I mean, Bel Canto is one of the best books ever. But when you, like, to me, this sort of notion of the main characters, their place in life was sort of like what mine was in 2020, 4 years ago, not that long ago, where my adult children, one was supposed to be in college and one was supposed to be in Europe working, and everyone came back and we sort of left the city for a place that was a little bit safer and spent this time together that was, on the one hand, you know, you had a stressful election like now. You had a pandemic. Thankfully, we're on the other side of that. And yet you have this weird gift of your adult children home in a way that you never thought you'd have that again. And you could tell, like, the narrator, for all the horrible and how terrible it is for her daughters, also has this sort of selfish, but in a weird way, I'm kind of enjoying this. At least this aspect of this, I'm going to find pleasure in this
Mhm.
aspect. That really touched me. And I read that, I guess I finished it a week ago. So I'm reading some other books, but I usually have like two or three until I figure out, okay, I'm going to finish this one. But yeah, that was my most recent completed book.
Okay, well, and just for the audience, Roy and I did not rehearse this. I read Tom Lake back in the spring of this year, so I can't believe that you called that out. It's one of my favorite books of the year, and everything you just said is completely accurate. And Ann Patchett's writing, beautiful as always. And I loved the metaphor between our town and what her life ended up being.
Right, because
It's
she,
like the two themes. Right now, I'm not going to say anymore because hopefully our Charleston community, if they haven't read this book, will treat themselves and read it. But Yeah, everything you said, plus I just want to add that little piece of context there. It was just
In
lovely.
Charleston, when we're not recording, we can actually have a conversation and not have to
Yes,
worry about a spoiler alert
exactly.
warning.
That is a date for sure.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Roy Kaufman from Copyright Clearance Center. What a pleasure to meet you. First time we've met. Have a little bit of a conversation about our work things, but to get to know you a little bit better as well. And look so forward to seeing you in Charleston and hearing your comments with Ann Okerson and Nancy for Long Arm of the Law.
Looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And thanks for having me. Bye bye.
Oh, you are so welcome. Take care. And everyone in our audience, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next time.